to miss it. It's called Polarized Politics. It's available where books are sold, and it's written by our next guest, Jeffrey Bell. Jeff, good to have you back with us. Nice to see you.
Thanks so much for having me.
This is a great book. It's done a tremendous amount of research. Did you do all this yourself?
Yes, I did. Of course, I lived through some of it in the 80s and 90s, and I was more and more interested in why social issues were coming to the fore, and yet why they always seem to be underrated.
Well, you're known as an expert on economics. Everybody now is talking jobs. They have diminished the role of the social concerns, almost non-existent in this particular race. Why are they important?
Well, because they're about people's core values, and it's not as easy to separate social issues from economic issues as most people think. I think Rick Santorum has done a great service by relating the decline of the family to economic problems. So it's really silly to separate the two, particularly when the sexual revolution in Western Europe, which is basically unopposed there, has resulted in a fertility rate that is way below replacement and is aging the workforces and really sending a lot of those countries out of existence.
Well, they jumped on me when I was involved in politics. This one writer up there at the Boston Globe said I considered that the woman's womb was a national resource. But the truth is we have suffered tremendously by the declining birth rate, haven't we?
Tremendously. It's hurt all our entitlement programs. We have fewer and fewer workers paying for more and more retired people on Social Security and Medicare. And the truth is that an aging workforce is always going to be somewhat less dynamic and less productive than a youthful workforce. We're better off in Western Europe and Japan, but it's still an increasing problem here.
Well, with these issues, they keep coming up. How come the media ignores them or scorns them? What is it to the cast in the media?
Well, there's a kind of stereotype, which is that a Republican candidate for president can use them in winning the nomination, but then they become irrelevant and you'd have to go under the radar with them in the general election. Between 1976 and 1984, the Democrats went from 62% of born-again Protestants to 19%, according to the 1984 exit polls. That was Reagan's advantage over Mondale, 81 to 19. And those were general elections. Really, you were the person historically who brought them into nomination battles with your tremendous showing in Iowa in 1988. But both before and after 1988, social issues were moving voters in the general elections.
Well, I heard somebody say, well, the Republican Party has now become a party of the religious right, and therefore it will lose. You say no way.
You know, the elections where we leave social issues out seem to be the ones where candidates never quite get up to snuff. The Bush campaign, as your bumper showed, profited from social issues in '88. Then they totally dropped them in '92 after Pat Buchanan's convention speech, which was a pretty feisty one. But still, Bush didn't have peace and prosperity on his side because the Cold War was over. People didn't value his foreign policy skills as much, and the recovery was anemic. So sticking to peace and prosperity was the biggest mistake the Bush campaign could have made in '92.
Nixon used to have a major issue on jobs, and then there was a subtext that he'd be playing on radio stations and so forth, talking about the social issues. Is that the way to play it, or should it be up front as the major thrust of a campaign?
Well, it depends on the year. Obviously, this is not a year, the 2012 cycle, when you're going to neglect joblessness and economic issues and the stagnant economy in general. But there's no question that when Obama, and this is really in the DNA of the Democrats and the left, when he decided to restrict religious freedom in making Catholics pay for sterilization, contraception, next-day abortifacients, and things like that, he had a tremendous reaction and started changing his tune on exactly what it was that he was doing. And even in blue states, these social issues have had a big effect. For example, up in Massachusetts, Senator Scott Brown was running even with a strong challenger, Elizabeth Warren, until they disagreed on this issue of forcing the Catholic Church to provide these services. Then, for the first time since Elizabeth Warren got in, Senator Scott Brown took the lead by 5 to 10 percentage points. Was that a coincidence? I don't think so. The two candidates disagreed very publicly on that social issue.
Jeff, you know, there was a woman, a law student at Georgetown University, who appeared before a congressional committee, and she said that students needed $3,000 a year for contraception and that they couldn't afford it. And as I understand, the Catholic school was supposed to pay for it. Now, Catholics say that fornication, if you will, sex outside of marriage, is a sin. And yet this woman is saying to be committing sin, but I want you to pay for my sin. Now, am I overstating that? Isn't that, I mean, Rush Limbaugh got a little bit, over the top on that thing, but was that what it amounted to?
I honestly think that the left, their greatest achievement is the sexual revolution, and they want to complete the job of imposing the values of the sexual revolution on everybody else, including those who have held out and disagree with some aspects of it. They've been this way since the 1790s. When the word the left was invented, that was all about tearing down the existing social institutions and political institutions. Yes, the royalty and the nobility, but also the left from the beginning in the 1790s with the Jacobins and Robespierre wanted to attack organized religion and the traditional family. And they have never changed in that regard. Every left movement has been about getting rid of traditional institutions.
So Obama's playing right down to that playbook. Is that what you're saying?
I think he's being true to it. I don't think he calculated the potential damage of doing this to the Catholic Church, because it's in the DNA of the left. That's why the issues are unavoidable, why they're going to keep coming up, because the left is going to insist on that.
One last thing. I understand that you want to go back to a gold standard. Is that takes you away from the moral aspect and goes to the economics?
I plead guilty on wanting to go back to the gold standard, but I actually think that it's very consistent with a moral view of politics.
The moral view, namely that the government will inflate the currency and cheapen the currency and take away people's money, confiscate it through inflation. Is that what you're saying?
That is exactly what I'm saying. And I always thought that the gold standard is a difficult thing to sell in this day and age, but it would never get off the ground unless the tens of millions of people in the social conservative movement were the impetus behind it. And that's part of what I'm trying to make happen.
Well, you're a choice. Thank you so much for this. This book, ladies and gentlemen, is not something you just kind of flip through. It is a meaty book, and it's got tremendous amount of history in it, and it's something that you would do yourself a favor to read. Polarized Politics, Jeffrey Bell. It's available where books are sold.